It would appear that our bestie Kim did not want to miss out on all the fun of sending the people from your own country that you lead into a field in Ukraine and have them get killed. Reports are coming out now that thousands of North Koreans have or will be arriving in order to support the war effort on the side of the Russians. Russia has largely dismissed this as just a rumor, even though we are getting video proof of it literally happening as we speak, but that's neither here nor there. Now, there is a lot of haze surrounding this and a lot of conflicting reporting. So I'm going to be breaking down what we know, what we don't know, what people are speculating, and what some of the implications of this are. It's worth noting here that this is a big deal and it's brand new, so it's going to have a lot of political implications. Because of that, you're going to see a lot of thumbnails that look like this, making claims that aren't actually backed by anything. I'm not saying I'm perfect, but at least I'm not doing that. So these are the facts as we know them. Well, according to the head of Ukraine's intelligence directorate, the GUR, this guy, who is often memed because he never changes facial expressions, there are currently 11,000 North Koreans training inside of Russia getting ready to go into Ukraine to fight. A report by Liga, a Ukrainian media outlet, quoted that these troops will form part of the Special Buryat Battalion organized within the 11th Separate Airborne Assault Brigade. This is one of Russia's VDV formations, and as a general rule of thumb is better equipped and better trained than your standard Russian grunt. That specific battalion will contain about 3,000 North Korean personnel, so we can expect similar battalions to be stood up in those other brigades. Now, funny thing, a Buryat battalion typically refers to military units that are ethnically Buryat, originating from Mongolia. It's kind of like the British Gurkhas, but for those damn Mongolians. I'm assuming that Russia just kind of looked at the North Koreans, looked at the Buryats, and said, close enough. Reports from earlier this month kind of went back and forth between saying that these guys will be sent into the area around Sudza, while others said they're already there, but as of writing this video, there haven't been any DPRK heroes spotted yet. That was until about 5 minutes after I wrote that line, and videos of North Koreans receiving Russian uniforms and walking around with Russian gear started popping up, so shout out to Google Alerts for that one. Now, we do know that there have already been North Koreans fighting in the Ukrainian battlefields already, away from the front line though, and specifically to support the KN-23 ballistic missile system. These fire the Hwasong-11s, but it was later seen that these had a 50% failure rate. By that definition though, they also had a 50% success rate, so it's kind of like a glass half full thing depending on what your expectations were going into it. The Guardian even reported that some of these dudes got schwacked while operating these things in the Donetsk region. And I'm very curious how North Korea is going to be handling casualties in this war. Earlier last year, in 2023, there were some floating rumors around and reports that North Korea had already sent actual large numbers of people forward into Russian-occupied territories, but these were expected to have just been laborers and civil engineers for repair work, digging holes, filling in said holes, moving rocks from point A to point B, that kind of thing. As of today though, we aren't sure if that actually happened though. Now all this is happening under the backdrop of Russia and North Korea increasing their ties together more than we've ever seen before. Like signing mutual defense pacts, opening up the North Korean economy like never before with arms dealing, and the kindling of a new bromance that makes me wonder if they've explored each other's bodies. North Korea does not have a lot in terms of cash or raw material, but what they do have is a lot of people, about 26.5 million to be exact. Around 5% of them are in the military, and this leads to a running army of about 1.6 million. And per capita, they're one of the most militarized populations in the world. Sending over a couple dozen thousand or so is a drop in the bucket for these guys. Now, obviously, with North Korea, a lot of the times the jokes write themselves. I don't really have to work that hard. Like bowling perfect games on your first time as a supreme leader, giant parades where you know the gear on the troops are carrying make no sense in the real world standpoint, but they look cool to an untrained eye, or slow motion Bollywood style editing for your new ICBM launcher. But I think we need to be careful about making jokes that these guys will just be a laughing stock the second they actually get to the front, if they get to the front. First of all, we don't really know the actual purpose of them being sent there. They could be on the next wave of storming a trench line, or they could be relegated to support roles like digging trenches, repairing roads, or the literal thousands of mundane physical labor tasks required for an army to operate that don't involve pulling a trigger. And I personally find that to be the most likely use for these guys, but that's just me. We just don't know yet. The military and the DPRK has historically been used for raw manual labor across the country, from helping at farms to fixing roads, carrying supplies, and all the other jobs that one kid in high school that called you dumb for wanting to go to college is doing right now. But let's just assume for the sake of the argument that every North Korean troop going into Russia is being prepared to fight actively on the front line. No, North Korea has not fought an actual war in basically forever. No, the training they've received thus far in their career is likely to be on par with what is needed to actually perform in combat, and their current skills with a rifle is questionable at best, let alone operating in a large-scale combat operation. And no, it's not likely that North Korea was going to send over 10,000 of their best troops. However, one interesting development came out of a report from the South Korean intelligence agency, the NIS, that reported that 1,500 North Korean Special Forces troops are already in Russia training. These guys were allegedly put on a Russian shipping boat and sent north while being given fake documentation in order to make them look like they came from northern Siberia, where the ethnic groups look vaguely Korean. Again, close enough. Okay then. The idea with that is that inevitably when these guys get hole punched in the forehead while peeking around a corner, they're going to be searched by Ukrainian forces, and the documentation would make it look like they were just a bunch of Siberians. This could be a move to provide some poorly done plausible deniability to the two countries, or it could be a way to throw off Ukrainian intelligence as to who they're actually fighting on the ground and cause some confusion. Either way, it's an interesting idea. These guys allegedly are being trained in the far eastern Vladivostok region before they would make the long trek west to Ukraine. How and why the South Korean government was able to determine that these guys were specifically special forces, I'm not sure. Maybe one of you guys can tell me. And I also should mention that North Korean special forces are not the same thing as like American Green Beret special forces, and that they specialize almost exclusively in infiltration missions and sabotage, specifically in and around the DMZ area between North and South Korea. And if we're gonna go strictly off of on-paper capabilities, practicing trying to get across the DMZ is a pretty good way to get good at crossing a no man's land of trench lines in Ukraine. But again, we have no reference as to how effective at those tasks they really are. But what about just your normal DPRK Joe? How is that guy going to perform? I think it's fair to expect that these North Koreans have already been well indoctrinated into a military lifestyle, and that basic fact does carry some merit with it. These aren't kids pulled off the street and sent into a conscript camp. They're already members of an army. They understand taking and executing orders to some degree, not to mention they're probably incredibly aware of the consequences if it's reported back to the DPRK that they did things like desert or surrendered. Getting them spun up on basic combat tasks like clearing a trench, rudimentary first aid, and combat jacking while on guard duty is not some impossible task to accomplish. Now, we already do have some reports of Kim's homeboys deserting. The numbers fluctuate depending on the source, but compared to the 10+ thousands of them in country, it's not the mass exodus some people would want you to expect. People forget that North Korea already runs labor camps in foreign countries, so sending people to Russia to live in harsh conditions and making sure they don't run away is something they already have some reps on. I'm sure the number of desertions will rise as time goes on, but it's not an automatic given, and as numbers rise of desertions, so too will the consequences. With that out of the way, I would probably expect these guys to perform about as well as a large portion of the Russian army, made up of people with minimal training, outdated gear, and about as much a will to live as a fat kid at an empty dinner buffet. That is to say, I wouldn't expect these guys to perform that well, but they will at some level perform. And there's enough of them that would cause some serious issues if they're deployed en masse. Will they be deployed in a carefully strategic manner that sets them up for maximum success? Probably not. But they are still a massive group of basically trained armed troops marching towards Ukraine's lines. If, and big if they are deployed in that manner. Right now, it's not super clear, one, what the implications of this will actually be on the battlefield, and two, what people are going to do about it. American Congressman Mike Turner, the head of the House Intelligence Committee, said that North Koreans being sent to fight for Russia must be seen as a crossing of a red line. According to him, these troop movements are alarming and an extreme escalations of the conflict in Ukraine. They require an immediate response from the United States and our NATO allies to avoid a widening conflict. Now, that's a hard nut to crack, no matter how you look at it. I don't think there are any more sanctions that can even be placed on North Korea at this point, unless we start cloud seeding to block the sky in order to sanction the sun from conducting a vital trade with North Korean plants to conduct photosynthesis. There may be some extra economic pressure to be placed on Russia, however, time and time again, they've proven that those can be worked around, and their economy has proven to be more robust than originally anticipated. And all the major sanctions have already been used up by now. Preventing this kind of escalation in a war is tricky because anything that we do in response is in itself another escalation. But as we've seen with the invasion of Kursk, that Putin isn't really good at keeping escalation retaliation promises when his quote-unquote red lines get crossed either. How the United States would perform in action to counter this would be interesting. It would need to be a very unique and likely very under-the-table kind of thing, and what that would look like, I have no idea. But it would probably make a good Tom Clancy novel. It's also worth noting that winter is quickly closing in on Ukraine. The footage we're about to see for the next several months is going to be a lot more of dudes getting fragged by drones in a trench instead of large-scale offenses that are only really possible in the warmer months. I wouldn't be surprised if the North Korean troops will largely just be rotated in and out of areas to hold a trench line while Russian troops are rotated to the rear to rest and warm up. It really doesn't take special commando level training to sit in a hole and point a rifle in a general direction of expected enemy contact. This is a very interesting development, and we'll have to see where it goes, so stay tuned for the part 2 whenever that does happen. Thank you for watching, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.